Hey everyone, this is Jay, and I'll be teaching you guys Advanced Java Lesson 4, Projectiles and Collision. So, code of conduct, be respectful, use your full name, turn on your camera, no side chatting, please try to stay on task. So let's go on to some review from last lesson. So how can you iterate through an array list without using indexes? You can pause and try to think of it on your own. The answer is you can use a for each loop. So for int num in nums, system.output println num. That is an example in which you just go through every single item in an array list and print out the number inside. Next question. Why might someone use inheritance? The answer is that inheritance allows child classes to reuse the code of their parent class. And finally, how do you signify inheritance from a parent class when declaring a class? You can pause here and try it out. All right, here's how. So you'll, for example, have class truck and then extends car. So you'll just say extends and then say the parent class. All right, now let's dive straight into it. So we have an overview. We're going to be talking about projectiles and collisions today. So briefly, just so we can make sure everything runs properly, I want you guys to go to runner.java and go to the main method and add the animate function. So screen.animate. And you can just pause right now and do that quickly. All right, now let's move into collisions. So let's try to think for a second. Using if statements and booleans, how can you track if two objects, in this case rectangles, collide? So notice that we have x1 and y1 and x2 and y2 are always in the top left corner, and we also have the width and the height. So pause now and try to figure that out on your own. All right, here's the answer. So essentially, you have four different if statements. You're talking about if it's too far to the left, if it's too far to the right, if it's too far up, and if too far down. And based on that, you can figure out whether or not there was a collision. All right, with this being said, let's go into an activity in the enemy class. So you're going to create two functions in the enemy class. You're going to create check collision with player of player, which checks for a collision that has occurred between the enemy and a player and returns a boolean accordingly. Either it has or it hasn't collided. You'll also have check collision with projectile, which is the same thing, but with a projectile. And hint, if the enemy or projectile is not visible, the function should always return false. So you may want to just put an if statement at the very top of your function saying if it's not visible, then return false. So pause this now and try that on your own. All right, let's go over the answer key. So right here, we can see our two Boolean methods. We have check collision with ship and check collision with projectile. So in this case, this is ship instead of player, but it's essentially the same thing. So imagine all of these are player instead of ship. All right, hopefully you've had enough time to pause this if you needed to, and we are going to move on. Now let's go into collision detection. So how do we know if a bullet hit an enemy? Well, we have to use a nested for loop. A nested for loop is a for loop inside another for loop. So what we have to do is check every bullet with every enemy. That means that if there are two bullets and three enemies, we can check bullet 1 with enemy 1, bullet 1 with enemy 2, and bullet 1 with enemy 3. Next, we go into bullet 2 and check with enemy 1, enemy 2, and enemy 3. So essentially how we would do this is first we would have an outer for loop just going through all of the bullets. And then inside that for loop, for every single bullet, it's going to go through all of the enemies. And that way it's going to check every bullet with every enemy. So here's an example. In this case, we break the loop because if a projectile hit the enemy, we don't need to check any more enemies. All we have to do is delete the projectile. So right here, we're going to go through all of the projectiles and all of the enemies, and then check if they did collide. Then you're going to remove the projectile, remove the enemy, and then exit the for loop. This, however, is a better version. Why is this better? I'm going to go real quick back to the first one, and now I'm going to go to the second one. So what is the difference between these two, and why is the second one better? You can pause this and try to figure it out on your own. All right, let's go into the solution. So the difference between these two methods is that the first method moves through the array list first to last, while the second method moves backwards, last to first. Moving backwards helps to prevent skipping objects that should be deleted. A key tip is that anytime you're deleting objects from an array list, move backwards through the array list. And we'll elaborate a bit more on this in the next slide. So let's say that we want to remove all the white squares from this array list. We should use a for loop to run through every item and check if it is white. And if it is white, we're going to remove it. Cool, well let's try this out. First one, not white, next. This is white, let's remove it. Done removing, let's go next. White, remove it. Done removing, next. Not white, next. What happened? Why did moving from forward to backwards not remove all the white squares? Well, this is because after you remove something from an array list, everything after the removed item shifts back one place. That means we end up skipping the item right after the removed item. So here, you notice how right here, we remove this, and then automatically we're on the next one, but we don't think we've moved forward yet, so we move forward again. That way, we're skipping this one. So if there are two right squares in a row, then we're going to skip the second one. Well, how do we solve this? We can move backwards. So first, let's try moving backwards. So not white, next. White, remove it. Done removing, next. White, remove it. Done removing, next. Not white, next. White, remove it. Done removing, next. Not white, next. No next item, we're done. So did you see how every square got checked? This is because all of the items we checked are in our rear view mirror. We don't have to worry about items sliding backwards because it's all happening behind us. That is essentially what we're doing with our second example for our for loop. We're moving backwards from size -1 because if we start at size, we're going to have an index out of bounds. And we end at 0 because index 0 is always the first item. All right. And remember, we only have to move backwards when we are going through an array list and we are removing items. So for example, if we're removing items in an array, items don't slide backwards when something's removed. Items are simply replaced with null when they're deleted. So the array does not shrink. If we are not removing items in an array list, we do not have to worry about deleted items. Now let's talk about removing items using the same backwards moving mechanism for removing bullets when they get out of the screen. So remember, if a bullet's x-coordinate is past the screen's width, which is 800, then it is out of screen and we should remove it. So let's first create a method that returns true if a projectile is outside the screen. This will be in the projectile class. So here we'll have public boolean is out of screen and return this.x is greater than 800. Now you can use this method to check if a bullet is out of the screen. Create a method that deletes the out of screen bullets, moving backwards. So you're going to have public void delete projectiles out of screen. And you're going to fill this out using public boolean is out of screen. So pause this video now and try this on your own. All right. Here's the solution. So in this method, we're going to have a for loop. We're going to start at the very back and we're going to move backwards. And for each of them, we're going to check if this projectile is outside of the screen, then we're going to remove this projectile. All right, let's do an activity. So let's create an instance variable in class screen called lives and initialize it to 3 in the constructor. So this is going to be an int variable lives. Make sure you have the following functions. So you're going to have check if enemies hit player and check if projectiles hit enemies. You're also going to have deduct life, which deducts 1 life from the player. And you can see the descriptions for each of these functions right here. After you're done with this, you're going to go into the animate function and you're going to call delete projectiles out of screen, call check if enemies hit player, and call check if projectiles hit enemies. So pause this now and try this on your own. All right. Let's go over the answer key. All right, so if we're going into screen, we can see right here we have private int lives and then we're setting it to 3. And then right here in the animate function, we're going to go through each enemy and have enemy move and then same thing with fast enemies, and same thing with projectiles. And then we're going to call these three things. So delete projectile out of screen, check if enemies hit player, and check if projectiles hit enemies. All right. So this is the end of Advanced Java Lesson 4. I hope you guys learned a lot, and we will see you in Java Advanced Lesson 5.